I'm Jim Clyburn, and I proudly represent the 6th Congressional District of South Carolina in the United States House of Representatives. Several years before getting elected to Congress, I started an event here in the little town of Santee, South Carolina. The event grew out of my political efforts way back in 1970, went statewide in 1978. I discovered during that contest that there were things going on in South Carolina that needed the attention of political figures outside of the political arena. And calling upon my growing up over in Sumter, South Carolina, not far from Santee, I was taught by my parents to really do the things for which you're not paid. And when I started having a family and my children started to grow up, I would say to them all the time, in spite of whatever may be your pursuit, your professional pursuits, find something to do for which you're not paid. And so, calling upon that experience, coming out of that campaign, I said to a lot of the people who volunteered in our efforts that we needed to find ways to be of assistance to the people that we were talking about representing in political halls, find ways to help them pursue their dreams and aspirations right where they live. And so we all started gathering here at Santee. Most of these volunteers were people who were golfers, but my wife was not a golfer, didn't like the game at all. But she did share with the whole notion of trying to do for people that which needed to be done to help them pursue their dreams and aspirations. So we gathered here, we would play golf, and the first tournament, of course, was not too successful. In fact, I had to contribute $500 of personal funds to the campaign in order for us to have enough money to pay all the bills and give us $250 scholarship. That scholarship, of course, went to the Columbia Urban League Guild, and that's where we started the effort to assist the Columbia Urban League Guild. But it was not long before we decided that that was not the way to go. We needed to really focus on the children. Now, along the way, we found it necessary to formalize the effort. We were sort of doing willy-nilly. So we formed a scholarship committee that grew out of our 501c3 efforts. And then we put together this professional organization headed by Janice Marshall. She became the executive director of the effort. And we have now become a year-round, full-time effort. We don't have a big staff. Janet Marshall and April Thomas, I think the two of them are sort of the core. They bring in other people on an as-needed basis, an accountant to make sure we don't violate the laws of the state, and recruit volunteers. There are some people who come back every year. They're golfers who plan their vacations. One I know come in from the West Coast, one I know from up in New York, and several from North Carolina, Virginia. They plan their August vacations around this tournament. So what happens at this tournament is, with the entrance fee that we get from the golfers, as well as money we get from the sponsors of this tournament, we are able to give each one of these 200 students will get $1,000 from the foundation, and each one will get a laptop contributed by Dell, and each one will get a software package from Microsoft. That's the minimum you leave with. Now, in addition to the scholarship funds that we give out, Janice Marshall negotiates with the schools to see how far beyond what we do, the school will be willing to do for these students. And those negotiations have resulted in the fact that Clemson University matches 5 to 1. We give 1,000, they give 5, that student walks out with $6,000. The University of South Carolina matches 2 to 1, South Carolina State. Clyburn, they all match 2 to 1. South Carolina State announced recently that it's now going to match 3 to 1. Now, I mentioned Canzater Scholars. I think we should know a little bit of why it's called Canzater Scholars. Well, one of the founders of this tournament, Rudolph Canzater, used to drive for me in my political efforts, and Canzater was also an avid golfer. He and I met as students at South Carolina State, and we played baseball together. I played second base for a little while on the baseball team, and he was the catcher. And we became fast friends. Later, he went to work for the Columbia Urban League, and that's one of the reasons we started assisting the Urban League Guild. But then he came to work for me at the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission, and that's when we really bonded. And when I was running for Secretary of State back in 1986, I ran first in 1978, lost, ran in 1986, lost again. Candace said to me, he said, "Now I'm going to help with anything that you want to do politically, but I'm not going to be satisfied until you run for Congress. That's where you need to be. These other jobs, they may be okay, but you should be in the Congress, and I'm not going to be satisfied until you run for Congress," which is what I subsequently did in 1992. Candace did not live to see me get elected to Congress, where I've been serving now for almost 30 years. But when he passed away, we renamed the tournament in his honor. So that's why we call these young people Canzater Scholars. Now, my late wife, as I said, passed away in 2019. They have now renamed this luncheon in her honor. And they've decided to expand the luncheon and to focus the luncheon on HBCUs. Emily was an avid fan of HBCUs.
My name is Janice Marshall, and I am the Executive Director of the James E. Clyburn Scholarship and Research Foundation. Under my administration as Executive Director, we have grown that we have awarded over 2,000 plus scholarships and $8 million in funds, in endowments and scholarships in honor of Dr. Emily England Clyburn. Will be continuing her legacy with a brunch, and we are calling it Uniting the 8 Pillars of Education for Greater Success. The 8 pillars are the 8 HBCUs that's in South Carolina. At those institutions, we will be presenting each one of them a $10,000 check to start the endowment in Dr. Clyburn's name.
We are hopeful of being significant contributors to the 8 HBCUs in South Carolina. This luncheon will focus on them, and not on students going to the schools, but on the schools themselves. And they are going to establish a Dr. Emily E. Clyburn endowment at each one of these 8 HBCUs. And we are looking for people who are interested in what HBCUs are all about and helping us to strengthen the endowments of these institutions. And I know $10,000 may not seem much, but it is the way to get started. I'm one of those people who believe the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And in this instance, the journey to $1 million in an endowment at each one of these schools will begin with $10,000 this year. And we hope to build that endowment at each one of these institutions to honor Emily's life and legacy. She was one of the, let's just say, modest philanthropists. And she was, in fact, a philanthropist. I don't get into it a lot with a lot of people, but Emily, every now and then, some ill fate may fall upon the family. And I found out things since her death that I had no idea about. I didn't ever examine her checking accounts. I didn't know what she was doing with the money, but I find out almost daily. Somebody was saying to me, the little check that they got from Emily at a particular juncture in their lives made all the difference to them in a very philanthropic way. She made a tremendous contribution. And this year will be the inaugural year of the Emily England Clyburn Memorial Brunch to honor her life and legacy. And I'm hopeful that they will follow up year after year out into the future, because Emily was a tremendous believer in the impact and value of HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. So all in all, we think that this event here in the little town of Santee does a whole lot for a lot of people. And of course, even the state of South Carolina has watched this. And the state, I don't know if it's still doing it now, but several years ago, they used to give out something called the Charles Bundy Award. That award went to an entity in the state that the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism considered to be making a major impact on rural communities. And they would pick annually a recipient for that award based upon what entity has made the most significant impact upon rural communities. And this tournament was selected several years ago to receive that award. So this effort here in this little town has a tremendous impact. In fact, the mayor said in one of our events that he heard from the local businesses, restaurants, and motels in the area that their biggest weekend in the calendar year is the weekend of this tournament. And so it is what I call finding something to do for which you're not paid. We're not paid to do this, but we gather remuneration for doing it in a way that only comes when you go beyond the call of duty.